Now, it took me a little while to come up with this one, Jake, but I called it the canonization of the vaccination. What do you
I
think?
love it. I
It's
love
pretty
it.
good.
Yeah. Except, of course, the religious leaders that we'll talk about in this particular story, they're against it.
Yes,
So
that's right. But they want to.
they're more interested in the excommunication of the
Oh,
vaccination.
damn it! See, this is why I need you, Jake. The excommunication of the vaccination.
Yeah.
That was infinitely better. I actually had to Google TIN words associated with religion.
I love it.
Yeah, excommunication did not come up, which is unfortunate. Now, this story is about a letter, an open letter that was written, voicing concerns about the fact that, now, if I've got this right, some of the cells that they use to test the vaccine come from unborn children.
Well, from aborted fetal cells from
Yes.
like the 70s.
Yes.
This
But
is
does it
what
matter when they come from?
probably not.
No. Like if you're against abortion,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't want people to be doing this because it sort of adds a bit of a positive slant on the idea of abortion. And in fact, if you word it a bit differently, it actually puts a positive slant on the idea of a human being being used for scientific research.
So So you're absolutely right to question the ethical nature of this, because it is an ethical question, or
Yes.
a moral question, I suppose. I wonder whether, and while you're sitting in this devil's advocate position, I wonder whether I can pose this to you, because these aborted fetal cells were harvested from someone in order to freeze them. So to create a bunch of, they take away a bunch of eggs, they take away a bunch of sperm, they combine them in order to do IVF, in vitro fertilization. Can't say fertilization today. And what happens is you will implant a number of fertilized embryos into the mother, and you will then, if there are still some fetuses that have been implanted, they will often just discard them. So you're talking about a bunch of discarded fetuses that weren't going to go ahead. This isn't a an occasion of a mother and a father loving each other very much, and undertaking what mother and fathers that love each other very much do, and then aborting that resulting fetus, and then using the cell lines out of that. This is the process that occurs during IVF, where you fertilize a bunch of eggs, and you implant a bunch of them, and you don't implant a bunch of them. And the ones that you don't implant, you can't freeze them. So you would, invariably you would just discard them. That's the nature of this. It is using things that were going to be discarded anyway.
Okay.
I don't know whether that changes your mind or anything.
Well, it's probably more about the fact that, I guess if I was them, I would probably take it one step back and say, well, that practice probably shouldn't be occurring either, if that's the case. But I don't know. That might be a rabbit hole I'm not comfortable going down, just because of my lack of knowledge with the situation. I suppose I'm just trying to figure out the philosophical nature of it, because I didn't know that that's where some of the cell lines come from to be tested for vaccination. So in a way, I kind of appreciate this information being brought to light so that people can make a decision based on their own views about it. Because the more information we have, the better. I don't know. It was interesting. My sort of knowledge stopped at the point where they said, not my interest, just the research that I was doing, if you can call it research, I was just Googling things, about, when Oxford said that they actually have to pass a very highly ethical process. And I don't know what that highly ethical process is, but regardless, if you have a view that that a fertilized cell is a human life, then there's no real sort of ethical argument that you could make, which would suggest that it's okay to harvest them, like you said, or anything like that. I don't. It's sort of it really does boil down to the question of whether or not those.
You're okay with that?
Yeah, that's right. And so I don't know what the ethical standards were for Oxford. Do you have any ideas about that one?
Look, it's multifaceted. Part of it is the acknowledgement that fertilized embryo, that fertilized fetus rather, is unable to live outside of the body and will never be implanted. So it is going to be discarded, one way or the other. Either it's used for good, and I would refer to vaccines, to medicines, to cell lines that are used to, discover new drugs and new therapies. I would discover them as a tremendous net good. And as a consequence, I would suggest that, it is perfectly reasonable to use aborted fetal cells. The other side of this is that they are, bound by strict ethical guidelines. So, when you apply to create a vaccine and specifically to use a cell line that occurred from part of an aborted fetal cell, you have to say, this is exactly what I'm going to use it for. And as part of your, you will have to submit your proposal to an ethical board. That ethical board will be made up of a scientist, of a medical practitioner, of a lay person, of a religious person, and of other people. So you've got this wide, I suppose, philosophical and strictly scientific and layperson lens being put across. So essentially, you've got somebody there to answer the pub test. Is this, just for the good of humanity? You've got a religious person there to say, is this being used in the most appropriate way? You've got the scientist there to say, this is good science and it's going to be used in order to improve the lives of humanity, etc. So look, they answer those types of questions around that premise of, is this ethically okay?
Yeah, which is interesting. So I guess one of the arguments that I heard this week was that, why bring this one up now? There are other vaccines that we have already put into place in Australia that are already part of our, routine vaccination schedules that have the same testing regime. Why pick this time now to choose this one? And I guess if I was inclined to be against it, I would say something along the lines of, well, okay, I will then.
Yep.
I'll make my argument across the board. I don't think any of those vaccines are. And now that all of this information is out in the open, and we have some hint that you would be able to not have to get the vaccine on religious grounds, well, then maybe other people aren't going to be getting other vaccines now based on those particular religious grounds, and based on the belief that those cells constitute human life, and that they shouldn't be using those to find the vaccinations or to test the vaccinations. So, yeah.
I mean, when it comes down to it, when we're talking about vaccines like the MMR, or the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, and the chickenpox vaccine, they were all created using cell lines that included aborted fetal cells. They're no longer they're no longer manufactured using aborted fetal cells because they've had the time to work on that created vaccine in order to essentially they've had time, they've had space, they're wanting to refine the vaccine, etc. With this new vaccine, we want to do it as quickly as humanly possible. And part of that, quickly as humanly possible part apparently involves a little bit of human tissue. And, the reason they use human tissue instead of any other tissue or instead of any other synthetic thing is because human tissue reacts like the thing that you're about to inject it into, which is the human. And it will react in a similar way, like aborted human cells aborted fetal cells will react in a similar way when presented with that virus. So essentially it's using us in order to test on us prior to testing on us. So it's an incredibly important thing. And there's nothing saying that, down the track, once this vaccine or these vaccines have been created, that it may not be necessary in the future to use aborted fetal cells.
Yes. Okay.
As the foundation. But at this stage, it is necessary in order to accomplish what, essentially is a once in a generation. Across the world, we have this massive crisis, and this massive crisis might be able to be addressed through a vaccine that includes cells that were going to be discarded anyway. To me, That's sort of the utilitarian view, which is generally always by perspective the utilitarian view of, look, we're using stuff that was going to be tossed in the bin. Do you want us to not toss it in the bin and therefore not get a vaccine? Or sorry, do you want us to toss it in the bin and not get a vaccine? Or do you mind if we use it a little bit? We'll give you a vaccine. We'll save the world,
Yeah, and I suppose I wonder if there's an argument to be made that even if you are of the understanding that this is a human life, and that it probably shouldn't be used, but I mean, if we don't get vaccinated, then that costs human life as well. So,
Actually,
I don't know. That's a tricky little thing that's just
I don't know.
in my head. Yeah.
I have we're moving slightly into
Highly
controversial
opinionated territory. Yeah.
highly opinionated and controversial territory.
Yeah.
Like I have very, very little empathy for people who don't vaccinate on supposed ethical or otherwise grounds. And that's partly that is because I have a wife who can't get vaccinated because she's immune suppressed, and the vaccine will likely have no impact on her ability to fight the virus. Whereas what will have an impact on her ability to fight the virus is not being exposed to it, because the so-called herd has immunity. That essentially we have enough vaccination in the population. I think it's somewhere around the 92 to 95% of the population who are vaccinated, which essentially means we should have no community transmission. Therefore, she is okay to go out in public. So sure, it's a little bit selfish from my perspective, but really I feel along the same lines that the Prime Minister does, which is there are very few reasons why you wouldn't get vaccinated. And probably the only real reason why you shouldn't get vaccinated, the real reason I'm saying, trying to not be controversial, the only real reason why you wouldn't do it is if you are, if you are medically compromised, if you are medically unable to get that vaccine.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who aren't religious who there was a couple of younger people on a panel the other week on the drum, and they were talking about the fact that they're just not going to get vaccinated, purely because there's just not a lot of information about it out there, that the long-term studies haven't been really shown to be effective and all that sort of stuff, nor can they be. So who knows what sort of... well, there's even fewer studies on the kids that got got various viruses that you could vaccinate against and died from it. Yeah,
and that's studies on the long-term evidence for those kids' lives.
I suppose it's an interesting discussion, because I really thought, like, in my head, when it first started, you just think, all right, yes, of course I would get vaccinated. And it's interesting that some people have given it some really philosophical thought. Some people have given it some really deep thought. And it's maybe not as nuanced as what you might like to think. It's not so cut and dry. Even if you think it's cut and dry in your head, even if you think it's like, well, yes, you should definitely get vaccinated, maybe it's not so cut and dry for the rest of society. And it's really important that we sit down and have those discussions. So
couldn't agree more. I think the best thing that people can do, because there's not a lot of information out there on a coronavirus vaccine at the moment, and that's because we don't have one. But I just really hope that in the future, when people are researching whether or not to go ahead and get that they are choosing their sources for vaccine information appropriately. Because that's what scares me most, is that you do have people who choose not to vaccinate because of misguided theories, poor information out there on the internet and through various sources. And I'm being very kind there. But I just hope that they listen to the right people, or moreover, if they've got the head for reading science-based articles or the actual papers themselves, go out and read them, because they contain important information, and moreover, they are very clear on what the the potential side effects of a vaccine or the potential detrimental sides of vaccines are. They don't go into the silly stuff, because there is so much bad information out there about vaccines. Sorry, I'm getting very, very preachy.
No, that's all right. We actually sort of missed a little bit at the beginning around who wrote this letter and what for.
Yes.
It was the Catholic. I'll get you to say it, because I might actually try and chop it into the beginning of the segment, if that's all right. So yeah, just tell us a bit about who actually wrote this letter, and how it came about, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah, so 3 of Australia's leading religious voices have written to the Prime Minister with their concerns that the COVID-19 vaccine will be, quote, ethically tainted by aborted fetal cells. The Catholic Archbishop of Sydney, Anthony Fisher, Anglican Archbishop of Sydney, Glenn Davies, and Greek Orthodox Archbishop of Australia, Makarios.
Macarius?
Yeah.
Macarios.
Grenazakis,
yeah, nice work.
Raised concerns about the deal with AstraZeneca that would ensure Australians would be among the first in the world to receive the Oxford University COVID-19 vaccine if human trials are successful.
Yeah, okay. And they did end the letter by saying, please be assured that our chambers are not opposed to vaccination. As we have said, we are praying that one may be found. We also pray that it may be one that not be ethically tainted.
Yeah.
So we've spoken about dog whistling on the show, and I feel like that's a little bit of a dog whistle, isn't it? Because they're not explicitly saying, look, don't do it. They're just sort of saying, hey, this is, if you are a Catholic and have these thoughts, then you should have the option. So yeah, little bit of dog whistling going on there, I think.